kind of groundbreaking. You feel like that when you're watching it, that you are watching something you've never seen before, and it's affecting you in a completely other way.
It's such a story of longing and existential crisis and transcendence, but it's told with such great, gentle humour that it's forgiving of all our foibles.
I think you're extraordinary.
Why?
I don't know yet. It's just obvious to me that you are.
You're in our room. We came here from Akron just to hear you speak. Oh my God, please don't look at me.
Well, I'm certainly very flattered.
In 2005, I was on vacation and Charlie called me and said, you know, I've written this play for you that I want you to do and I'm gonna send it to you. And I assumed it was like a play, but then I got it and realized that it was sort of this weird thing.
Charlie gave me the play, and it was called Theater for the New Ear. It was part of that program. There was a Coen Brothers piece and Charlie's piece, originally in New York, and then they came to Los Angeles to do it, and the Coens weren't coming, so Charlie was to write another piece. And so he gave this to me and David Thewlis and Tom Noonan, and I love the piece so much.
My cell phone rang out of nowhere, and with an unrecognisable number, and I picked it up. And it was like, hi, this is Charlie Kaufman. So at first I thought it was a joke. I didn't think it was Charlie Kaufman. And he rang and he said, this is Charlie and I've written a part for you. So I was like, this is one of the best days of my life. So I thought it was a movie. Then he began to explain what it was. And basically what it was is we were on the stage at lecterns with a script in front of us. Carter Burwell with a small orchestra was to one side of the stage, and central the stage was a Foley artist doing all the sound effects. So the effect was really, it was a live radio play. And we rehearsed in New York for about 2 days, then flew to LA and performed it for just 2 nights. And that was it.
Well, Dan and I, we saw the original Anomalisa 7-8 years ago, and we loved it. And ever since then, I was trying to get a script from Charlie. And in order to get a script, I had to start a studio. I literally started this studio to get a fucking script so I could read it. Because I loved that story and I didn't want it to just die there, you know, this thing that no one else would ever see.
It was just a masterpiece in terms of typical Kaufman engineering. I think that Anomalisa, the actual event at UCLA, sitting there watching the 3 actors and the Foley artist, that was the best thing, the best written thing I've ever seen, because he absolutely used every single piece of the buffalo, and to mix metaphors, he made the frame part of the painting. And he always does that, but this was 100% efficiency. And not only that, but using that Kaufman blend of talent and engineering to express something that we've all noticed for 6,000 years and have never expressed in any medium successfully.
Dino and I had talked over the years about the possibility of doing something with stop motion that explored more adult ideas and adult themes, and something that was more emotionally grounded. So when I read the script and I was super moved by it, it was just kind of like a dream come true.
Two beautiful ladies, trumps, my friend.
Oh my goodness. Thank you so much. I'm blushing.
Yes, thank you so much. I'm blushing too.
I'd never seen anything like that before. You know, it's like they had such chemistry, and it was beautiful what was happening. Like you could see these scenes.
We recorded it in chronological order, and I just remember laughing a lot, and you know, it was a very, very intimate thing as well, because usually you don't do animations together. The animations I've done before, you do them in isolation and they put all the voices together later.
That's what actors do. They interact, and if you have them in a booth by themselves, there's a kind of a sterility, I think, to the performance. For a lot of animated movies, that's kind of what they're looking for. You know, they want everything to be very clean and precise, and you know, they have someone repeat a line over and over and over and over again with different intonations to try to then piece it together afterwards, and it leads to a kind of a soulless quality. You know, often in animations they'll cut out everything that isn't clean. They'll cut out mouth noises and breathing, and we left all of that in and animated it. And I think that contributes to the feeling of these puppets being alive. we were very thrilled with the result of the recordings and the emotion and specificity of the moments between the characters.
I need to be with you. I want to leave my wife.
Really? Michael, that's a big decision.
No. It's something I have to do. I mean, if you're interested.
I mean, yeah. I mean, it's awfully sudden. I mean, I don't want to be responsible for breaking up a marriage.
Charlie, I just love his writing, and I love him as a human being. And he and Duke worked so beautifully together. He's also incredibly generous. He can really share the stage with Duke, you know?
It's sort of like how you see your parents. I mean, they were just like a couple. I mean, they would start to direct me, and then they would run off and talk and come back, and one of them would tell me something, and it was sort of like one person.
There was only 5 of us in the room a lot of the time, and a technician in a booth, and it was like 5 friends having a very good time together. And if something comes of it, well, great. But there's no one looking over our shoulders here. There's no big Hollywood producers telling us what to do. We could do what we wanted. And so when left to ourselves, we did this. But even then, I wasn't sure what it would become.
Hello. Welcome to the Frey Jolie.
Hi. I'd read about this thing called the Frigoli delusion, which inspired some thought about a direction. And the Frigoli delusion is kind of a form of paranoia in which the person believes that everybody in the world is the same person in disguise. I was interested in it as a metaphor for a man who can't connect with other people, and subsequently he tends to start hearing everybody as the same thing, and it was a stylistic choice.
When we see Michael arriving on the aeroplane, speaking to people at the airport, and his taxi driver, and the man at the reception of the hotel, and the man who he orders room service from, and the woman in his head who he's going to call the old lover, all have the same voice, which is the voice of Tom Noonan.
Fuck's sake, Michael, I don't know who I am. I mean, who are you? Who's anybody? Who could answer that question? I don't...
He had an enormous challenge, and he's so brilliant. I mean, he says like it was hard for him because on stage he could do all these different voices because you could see it was the same person in the film. He had to kind of limit his voice so that you got that it was the same person.
It was not thrilling to begin with. It was like, oh shit, I gotta, you're not gonna see me and I have to sound the same and everybody's gonna think, well, he can't do voices. I don't know, but I got over that, but originally it was sort of hard.
But he still plays every character so differently. Like, his kid is so different than the wife, who's, you know, so different than the ex-lover, who's so different than the hotel manager. I mean, he still created all these characters. And yes, I'm sure he limited his vocal range so that they all had a very similar sound, and yet he created completely different characters every time.
Michael, you're freaking me out. I can't take being more freaked out right now.
I went to Charlie once and said, Charlie, why, of all the people in the world you could use, why would you pick me? I have such a monotonous voice and I don't really ever sound any different. And he said, no, I knew you could do it. But the fact was, he picked me because I sound the same all the time. And so I'm sure he was laughing inside when I asked him that. Allow me to be the first to welcome you to Cincinnati. Sorry, I grabbed your hand. I'm just going, fuck you! No need more than a day for the zoo, it's just zoo-sized. Touch the door to the room. If it feels hot, do not open it. I mean, originally in the original script, I remember counting it and it was like 41 or 42 different people. But then in the movie, you had to have every little voice of people having conversations and fights and discussions. And so I recorded hours and hours. What time's your plane tomorrow? Yes, sir. What can I get you? Yeah, I'll be waiting outside Terminal 5. Could I see some identification? Final boarding for Flight 108. What is the special tonight? I mean, there's hundreds and hundreds of people.
Well, this is all Tom. Everything's going to be Tom.
That's right.
Okay.
Yes. Oh, yes.
But we still have one Lisa.
All Tom,
Yeah,
all
one
the time.
Lisa.
You hear that everyone's Tom Noonan. Clearly, that's Michael's point of view because that's how he hears the world.
That's
You're safe now.
representative of the kind of cacophonous drone of the life that he lives. We get the impression he's not a very happy man and he's had enough and he can't take any more. Where Jennifer comes into it, he hears someone standing out from the crowd, and this is an epiphany to him. This is the most beautiful thing he could imagine, and we see a glimmer of hope.
Keep talking.
I like different languages. I love French and Italian the most.
The voice record process was like the easiest and most sort of immediately satisfying part of the experience because these actors are so good and the script is so good. And we took that enthusiasm and that passion immediately into everything else that we did.
We'd started out approaching more conventional puppet designers who do stop motion puppets, and we'd always had the directive that it should be naturalistic to them. But there was a sort of difficulty in translating that, I think, because I can only speculate that there was a certain kind of idea about what a puppet needs to look like. So we were getting these kind of drawings that always seemed a little cartoony, a little elfin. So we started looking at real people. And then Duke showed us a picture of his ex-brother-in-law. I thought it was a good Michael, and so we agreed on that, and he was brought in and photographed, and then Carol, our sculptor, did a maquette of him.
We wanted to build some of the character into the actual sculpt of Michael. So his sculpt is very unique in the sense that he's not like this neutral pose. He's actually sculpted to have kind of more rounded shoulders, and his head slopes a little bit, and he's got bad posture, and that's actually in the sculpt and in the mold, and that's his starting neutral point that people start animating from.
Lisa was spotted by our producer Rosa Tran at a bar called Little Dom's.
We're sitting there eating, and I look up and I see this woman at the bar. And for some reason, she just looked like Lisa to me. And it turns out she's an actress, and she came in to pose for us.
She was brought in and photographed and used as the basis for Lisa. She was changed a bit. She's very thin, and Lisa we wanted to be a less in shape person.
How did it happen?
I don't like to talk about it.
In the play, that was left ambiguous as to what was physically wrong with Lisa. But once we're making it into a movie, we had to decide what her physical problem was, so I'd always imagined it as some sort of facial scar. And then it was a question of what it looks like and how severe is it.
I had no idea what it was going to look like. In my imagination when I did the play, it was bigger. You know, it was more kind of glaring. But I like that it's so subtle and she's so self-conscious of it still.
It's the bathroom. Air conditioning and heat controls here.
We started to look for the world face. And we would find faces online that were androgynous, but they kind of just didn't fit.
We wanted everybody to look the same, but not have it like overtly obvious.
We didn't want it to be non-naturalistic. I don't think we wanted it to be in contrast to the way Michael and Lisa looked. But we wanted it to be able to serve as a male, a female, and a child. So that required a certain type of face, which ended up being, I think, generic.
And the way that we achieved that is we photographed 30 people actually that were working in the studio at the time, combined all their faces in Photoshop, and ended up with this amalgamation of everybody, this combination of all the faces, and it had this sort of generic look.
Great to see you.
Yeah, oh, thanks. What are they?
It's everybody, honey. What's it doing now, Daddy?
I don't recognize any of them.
We hired 3 storyboard artists. They'll go through and in between all of Duke's thumbnails, and then we export that out, give it to post, and then our editor puts a radio play together. And then he will piece the radio play with our storyboards.
Maybe we could figure out...
You've got to be kidding.
Oh, this isn't going well. I'll just get the check then, miss.
And then the directors will sit in the room with the editor, and then they'll go through the animatic backwards and forwards and speed things up or, you know, give it some more air. And this is the first time they're really seeing the movie. From the numbered animatic, an assistant will sit and go through and then break down each of the shots and then listen to the audio and then give us a track read. That's what we use on the floor. So once we land a set and it's lit, we'll bring the animator to the stage. All the puppets are there. The director will come in, give some direction, and then we're kind of off and running.
Then you've got this sort of protracted process of getting tiny incremental pieces of footage in that really don't tell you a hell of a lot other than, oh, that's a cool shot or that's a cool moment. You plug those things into the animatic as they come in, but you can't see the whole thing put together. Once you're done, you're sort of stuck with it. So you're basically saying, this is the movie. I hope it's good. It was nerve-wracking.
It's actually real love. Hey, Ma, look, airplane.
The sun is always there, you just don't see it.
Like that's an opening in the clouds.
Yeah. Most stop motion stuff is a lot of hard light, which is good because you can get the lights further away. You kind of create a little more space that way. There's room for animators and people to move around. But we wanted, you know, like an intimate, dramatic feel. So in live action, you'd get lights nice and close to the actresses or actors when we were filming them, so they would be softly lit, nice eye lights. We wanted to take that approach, so that meant, you know, building smaller versions of key lights and backlights and moving them really close to the puppets. It was more in the way than a lot of other stop motion films, but, you know, I think it was worth it.
After you, sir.
Looking at reference photos and reference films, you know, films from the 70s and even earlier, where the camera work was more slow and the frames were more composed and the characters would kind of move throughout those frames.
I find it enormously charming that you read any book with a dictionary next to you.
Because it was an adult-themed movie, so we knew we wanted to, put those filmmaking techniques into it, where it's, a more sophisticated audience will be able to get sucked into the story.
Wait! Oh, it's your breakfast, Mr. Stone.
As you're watching the film, hopefully you're taken away by the story of the film, but obviously now and again you're thinking, how long must that have taken to do just that little moment?
Each animator had a goal of about 2 seconds of animation, which is 48 individual frames of animation per day. Some hit their goal, most did not.
Like when you think about the airport scene, when they're on the people mover, that they had to move each puppet individually for every single motion, blink, everything.
Depends how many characters you have to animate, the complexity of the shot. Let's say you have 10 characters to move, then you could do like maybe 20 frames a day.
This scene has a lot of secretaries that are all typing away as Michael walks in. I'm animating not just Michael walking through the door and talking to them, but all the background ladies just typing away. Definitely a lot to keep track of.
Longer shots typically are the more complicated shots, so you're not really doing 2 seconds of animation a day. Maybe you're doing 8 frames of animation a day. So if you're doing 8 frames of animation a day on like a long shot, suddenly you're animating for many, many, many months. So many things happen over the course of those many months. Lights burn out. The camera, just by gravity and nature and the elements, it can start to shift, and suddenly you're panning away from the action. Puppets break, sets shift. So there's a reason why, these are like things you don't do in stop motion, because it starts to unravel the process and create all these challenges. But we felt like it added something to the movie that made it worth it.
Looking out the window, and then the dawn would come up and lights would change over time. I mean, they had to change the lighting a tiny bit. He's racking focus and doing camera moves, and it's sort of hard to imagine how anybody could do that. And I mean, I direct movies, and I would have no interest in doing this.
You have a shot, like a single shot that's multiple minutes long, like Michael and on the phone with Bella in the hotel room or something. That can take many, many months.
So in stop motion, you'll break up the sets. You can shoot one angle on one stage and another on another stage.
So we had to make 7 hotel rooms. We had to make several hallway sets, so we were shooting the same scene on multiple stages.
With our sets, it has to live on stage for weeks, if not months at a time.
With many lights lighting a stage, that stage would get hot during the day. It could get up to 80. During the summer, it could get up to 90 degrees. And at the end of the day, you turn those lights off and you go home and it cools off. So you have the wood of the set getting hotter and hotter and expanding throughout the day. And then for 10 hours, the lights would be off, it would cool, it would contract.
So sometimes you'd walk in the morning and you kind of look at the shot from the night before and the shot in the morning, and it would look different. It would look like somebody, an earthquake happened.
There might be a slight shift or a bump or just the set readjusting to, its environment.
So when that happens, we'll have to invent ways or find ways to reset it, get it back to the prior frame.
The set would shift and we would get a car jack and slowly raise it up back into place. Yeah, there were stages that were in one place jacked up and then chained down to the ground just to help get it back into position.
And it's on a microscopic level of in the small increment of the fluctuation that we'd have to adjust for. So it's crazy. It's very small. But you'll see it on screen if we let it go.
The scope of puppets kind of increased as the time went on. You start with wanting to have enough puppets for the stages, and then you add more stages.
We started with 15 stages, and by the end of it, we had 21.
Therefore, you have to make more puppets. So we started with probably 10 Michaels. We ended up having 20 of the main character. Extras were another thing that we thought we only needed, maybe 50. We ended up more towards 120 extras.
Also, with 1/6 scale, there's a lot of stuff in 1/6 scale, like little props and things, because Barbie's 1/6 scale and some other toys as well. So you can purchase things, and then we have to make molds of it and modify it. It's all still fabricated, but at least you have something that you can kind of work off of that's in that scale, so you don't have to make every single thing from scratch.
1/6 scale is pretty standard for wanting a little bit more detail in stop motion while still having manageable set sizes.
If the figure were to be any bigger, the stages and the sets would be much bigger. So we knew we had limitations working in this building, so we had to make sure everything that we built would eventually have to fit on these stages.
You can go smaller and you lose the ability to put nuances into your animation and your puppets.
All those hallway shots, those walls would fly away. The animator would walk into the stage and animate, step away, and then close the walls. So we would work with the art department to figure out which walls hinged so the animator would have access.
We ended up not doing ceilings practically, like the basement office. That set was huge, and to put a ceiling on top of that set, like the animator would have no access whatsoever. So those shots, we had to rely on our digital compositors to add in the ceiling afterwards.
We had to work really closely with the art departments and the animation departments, trying to determine how best to let the animators kind of get in there and work, because the whole film feels very kind of intimate, kind of claustrophobic. You know, the hallways feel claustrophobic, but a full-size person can't get in there and animate under those conditions. So our job was to help figure out which of these pieces can be digital and which have to be practical.
We video recorded the voice recording sessions so that we could use it in animation for reference. So a lot of what you see Lisa doing, like with her hair and her gestures, that's Jennifer Jason Leigh.
I can't believe you're in our room. We came here from Akron just to hear you speak. Oh my God, please don't look at me.
A lot of the animators would shoot video reference of themselves acting the shot out, and then Duke and I would also do the same thing, and just we would compare the shots, and you know, I like what he's doing here and I like what I'm doing there, and how can we combine these things? Just use as a tool, as a guide to where and how these puppets would move.
The movement is definitely based in the real world, so it's less exaggerated, there's less like cartooniness, and so it's definitely referencing life.
So you're not going to use, for example, the classical technique where you're going to have a lot of anticipation movement and squish and squash, which is very bouncy for a cartoon. This is very realistic.
I mean, I knew Wallace and Gromit and other sort of stop motion stuff, and I really didn't know what they were going to come up with. I didn't think it was going to look anything like it did. So the fact that it looks sort of, I don't know, realistic is the word, but they seem really alive.
There's something about the fact that they're puppets, but they're dealing with things that we've all felt or experienced in one form or another. And because they're puppets, we can project ourselves onto them in a way that you can't maybe when it's a real person.
The closer you get to naturalism, the more complicated and subtle the animation has to be. And so we were exploring types of facial animation that could get the broadest range of emotional expression. So we leased a 3D printing machine and we went forward with replacement animation. This style of animation where it's split in the face and you have about 150 different brow pieces and about 150 different mouth pieces for all the mouth expressions. And you have smiling and you have chewing and you have yelling and you have the brows that are worried and furrowed and surprised. But a lot of times with the replacement animation, all of the facial animation is done in advance in the computer, and then those face sets are printed and then they're swapped out on the stage. You have the facial performance predetermined. We didn't want to do that because we felt hard to get a sense of the full performance looking at those CG faces. It's really seeing the facial expressions under the light and being able to adjust performance and change things on the fly.
The split face was just economically it makes sense. Where we differ from other features is we left the seam in. And I kind of look at it as, we're seeing this whole movie from Michael Stone's point of view. And is that how he actually sees everyone? Because he already sees everyone as kind of a world face. Is it truly a mask? I think it was a really wise artistic choice.
There was some sort of question about it and resistance to it along the way from other people. But, since we were the deciders, we stuck to our guns. And after we decided to use this technique and keep the seams, we started to see the value of it in a thematic way and started to incorporate the actual seams into the story.
There's a dismantling of the puppets, which is obviously metaphorical in the moment that it happens. It's funny in the moment that it happens, and it's also educational in the moment that it happens, in that you actually see how these puppets are working, how this stop frame animation that we've been losing our hearts to we suddenly, the film stops for a few seconds to go like, look at that. It's also therefore Michael Stone going, look at me, I'm lost, I'm coming apart. I've lost my identity. I'm having an emotional existential crisis. So all this, the face falling off, is so representative, and that was, you know, that was always part of the idea that these puppets should be acknowledged as puppets.
And I've had some people ask me, would it have cost just too much money to take out all the seams? And no, actually talking with the post department, it would have been cheaper to just erase the seam entirely than to what they did, which was actually, like, sometimes the seam would be too big, or it might, you know, chatter a little bit with the rest of the face. And so they would actually go in and hone the seam, but not get rid of it. So for them, it was, you know, a tougher task to doctor the seam when it needed to be than just erase it.
Fuck you, Michael. Fuck off.
Bella, I'm just trying to understand.
You kind of knew you were going into uncharted territory because we would ask, you know, other studios like, oh, we're coming up against this problem, and, you know, maybe you can give us some advice. And they're like, oh yeah, that's a problem. Good luck with that.
In animation in general, particularly stop motion, where it is hands-on for every frame, there are no easy shots.
Everything that could possibly go wrong did go wrong multiple times on this movie.
I think it started when the gentleman delivered the 3D printer a week late. How are you gonna get this off the truck? He goes, well, they told me you would have a forklift.
Things would break during the scene.
Having a meltdown because it's taking so long.
It looks weird, what's wrong with it? And we realized something had broken in the printer. We gotta get the repair guy out here to fix the printer again.
There are times when we couldn't pay him.
We ran out of money.
You guys don't have enough money for this.
We lost animators.
We were running out of stage space.
Our puppets didn't work.
The wire puppets have a tendency to break.
We're out of shirts and we're out of fabric and we have to go hunt this down.
The gentleman said he had to repossess our water machines. We were running out of time, and it was raining, and the roof did leak on us, and we had to cover all the sets and stop animating.
It was kind of mind-boggling.
There's some guy here and he wants to repossess some of the containers. These containers were storing all of our sets. You're not taking anything.
It was a pretty stressful time.
There were times it was very overwhelming.
This was a real long haul, and it was very hard. So you just rolled up your sleeves, put your head down, and you get right into it.
September 16th, 2005. Dear Michael, I'm sorry to see you go, but I understand.
In terms of looking back on it, I'm amazed that it got made.
I was in the studios with them times when they were feeling like this wasn't working.
I spent 2.5 years terrified that we were running headlong off of a cliff.
And everything we heard during the production was it was a nightmare. It was a runaway train from the very beginning.
But I'm also proud of the fact that I never made it the creative's problem. I sat in my office and I drank and I sucked my thumb and I looked at a ledger getting longer and longer. And I just prepared my family for me moving in with them.
We didn't know if we were going to finish it. It was often felt like we might not, although we kept pushing forward. We persisted in the face of like discouragement and depression and all sorts of other things that should have stopped us. And I'm proud of it, and I'm just glad it exists.
People told us a lot, that this can't be done, and we have to scale down our expectations, everything, and it's hard when almost everyone is telling you that.
In 31 years of acting, it's one of the things I'll look back on and go, the things I'm very, very proud to be a part of. This is going to be in the top 3, you know.
The experience of working on this movie was the most emotional roller coaster of my life, but without a doubt the greatest creative experience of my life.
Maybe someday we'll meet again under better circumstances. Love, Lisa, Anomaliza.
It's actually not a depressing film, because I think we relate to it so much, and hopefully smile in our understanding of what Charlie's trying to say, because he's really not trying to depress us. I think I came out of it, most people do, going, that was great, you know, an alleviation of that mundanity of life, I think, by showing it so uniquely and so with such novelty.
The love scene was incredibly intimate. I mean, we were not even touching each other. You know, we were 6 feet away from one another, and yet it's probably the most intimate love scene I've ever done, and the most embarrassing to watch, and it's not me. So, I don't know how that works or how that happens, but there you have it.
The interesting thing of the sex scene is to go back to the beginning of it all, is that the sex scene was originally performed on stage when it was just a sound play. So obviously when we came to do that in the studio, you know, it was understood that this would be represented one day by puppets.
Will you kiss me again?
I hope to.
I hope you do too.
That was a thing of beauty. The goal was to have this sort of be an extension of the interaction between Michael and Lisa that led up to it, and not be a break in it and not betray the characters and allow them to have this experience with each other in the way that Michael and Lisa would. And we were very aware of the pitfalls of people thinking, you know, this is going to be funny and it's going to be like Team America and it's puppet sex and it's a joke. And so we wanted to do everything in our power to make it not that and make it clear that any humor that comes out of the scene is going to come out of organically out of the interaction between these characters and their awkwardness.
Ouch, ouch. My hair.
Sorry, I'm sorry.
It's okay, I'm sorry.
It's okay.
One of the things right off the bat that we established is we did it essentially in one shot. The reason being, there's nowhere to go, there's nowhere to escape. It's kind of raw and authentic, and there it is. Here are these two people, they're exposed and vulnerable. But that posed a lot of challenges, technically, because you can't cut around things. It's, you know, this interaction has to be seamless from a practical standpoint, and there's all these technical challenges, like the puppets interacting with each other, because these puppets are made to, when you bend them or when you push them, they move. That's how they function. So if they're interacting with each other and you move one thing, everything moves. The bed moves, the sheets move, the hair moves, Lisa moves, Michael moves, everything moves. And so the animator was challenged with constantly pushing and pulling their performance, working sometimes 2 or 3 hours to get a single frame. This is why this scene took many months.
And in order for us to visualize and do all this stuff, we actually started with 2 actors, adult actors, got a bed here. They went down to Bed Bath & Beyond. They got a comforter, 2 nightstands, pillows, and we had 2 adult actors come in. They were directed.
What happens if you scoot forward a little bit, but you don't put your heels on the edge of the bed? That's kind of awkward. Yeah, it's kind of like that.
And they acted out the scene. And so you could see how the comforter gets pulled down and how do they take off their clothes, because, you know, especially in an intimate moment like that, you want to see what's going to happen organically in the scene. And I wasn't going to do it, nor was, you know, any of the animators going to do this reference video for it.
I love where Lisa hits her head on the headboard, and I think that works because that's literally a real thing. Like, that actually happened. The actress that was, you know, acting out the sex scene scooted back too far, misjudged her distance from the headboard, laid back and hit her head on the headboard. Oh shit, are you okay? And so we were like, yeah, let's use that.
I was dreading that shot, that scene. It was just really difficult. We started prepping for that shot in March, and I think we launched in July.
There was lots of preparation that had to go into it, lots of particular designing clothing that could be animatable, designing rigs that could animate the clothing, animate the puppets.
We did R&D testing how the shirt would come off, what type of material. You know, in stop motion, the clothes have to be rigged. The comforter, same thing, has to be rigged. Michael has to be special, and so does Lisa. And this is where we put all our money.
We started with wire armatures and then realized with the wire armature, you don't get as sharp and defined of bends as you would with the ball and socket armature. So for the sex scene, we needed full ball and socket armatures so they could do all the things that they needed to do in that shot and still look realistic, where costumes couldn't hide anything that was a problem.
The arms were hair punched, the legs were hair punched, and so those 2 puppets are the most anatomically correct with bits and hair.
We had to engineer puppets that had a jelly-like substance under a thin layer of silicone so that they could when they bent, their fat looked like it moved like fat moves. And when they compress into each other, it looks like they're compressing.
You know, the silicone, it's a dense material. It doesn't provide for a lot of give or compression when the puppets are laying on top of each other. So, you know, we had to work a lot with puppets trying to figure out, you know, we were actually kind of cutting into the puppet as we were going and hollowing it out just so Michael's stomach would compress a little bit more than it would naturally. And there were multiple flying rigs, a rig coming into the top of Michael's back to help him arch his back in a certain way and in his butt to keep him locked down to the bed.
And then the bed had to be specially rigged for compression.
You know, the bed is a foam mattress, and the puppet's not going to be heavy enough to actually compress that mattress himself. So we actually have rigging underneath that help pull the mattress so it looks like he's actually bearing weight on the bed.
It was so complicated to animate with the bedding and clothes coming off that, you know, during a shot the animator would need to put what they call a rigging, like little pieces of, you know, arms that would come in and where you can animate basically clothes coming off or stuff like that. So for us it was always the animator would put it in and all of a sudden there was a shadow on the bed.
There was just, you know, rigs, wires poking into every little nook and cranny, trying to conform those characters to do what they were supposed to do. So we had to go back and paint all that out. And that one was a tricky one because people really need to be focusing on the moment and not wondering how they did it or thinking, oh, they didn't do a good enough job. So that one, there was a lot of pressure for that scene, I think.
You know, everybody had to kind of go in with a plan. So for the lighting department, because we knew it was going to last so long, we had to, you know, once we lit everything, we needed it very durable, you know, because we couldn't have anything sag. So a lot of time was spent with us, you know, making sure nothing would move.
The most extreme animatable clothing scene was the sex scene, where they actually physically had to take off all of their clothing. And at one point, you know, Michael's just wearing a button-down shirt, so there's nowhere to really hide the wires.
The way that you put wire into clothing is you glue it on one sheet of fabric and then you glue another sheet of fabric on the other side. But now suddenly it's 2-ply fabric and it looks too thick.
One of our costumers came up with the idea of running wires on each dark stripe in the shirt and then stitching it individually, each wire in there.
Hiding wires in the strips of Michael's shirt that were the opposite side of what camera's seeing on a single ply of fabric. And then as he opens the shirt on this movement, it flips. They take that shirt, they get rid of it, they bring in another shirt where the wires are reversed and they're on the other side of the fabric. So there's multiple shirts, there's multiple pieces of underwear, multiple skirts, multiple bras to just execute the technical aspects of, you know, how these things move.
I don't want to lose you. I lose everyone.
Seeing the final film and watching how it plays out, it's so natural that you really feel for them, and it doesn't take away that they're puppets. I think it's, you know, probably one of the more tender scenes, love scenes you'll see in a movie.
You have this recording of Jennifer and I doing what we did, not really knowing how it would be represented, and then you have what those guys went away and did with the puppets, and bringing those two things together. And what you do end up with is just something very, very, very beautiful and very honest. People laugh sometimes at first because they can't quite believe what they're seeing, but then there's a hush in the audience where they're like, oh my god, this is one of the most truthful sex scenes I've ever seen, and it's two little puppets doing it. But it's, you know, it's beautiful, it's very beautiful and very funny.
There were a lot of conversations about putting this in a practical world, in an environment, as opposed to clean, you know, sound effect stuff. And it's its own animal, this movie. We're always trying to push it towards a feeling of actuality as opposed to artificiality.
Part of that is like trying to just not make things so polished and clean. You can do that with stop motion. You can make everything like perfect. All the sound is pristine and everything's super polished and clean. And the same approach that we had to the visuals, not cleaning up the animation, not painting out the chatter and visual effects, not painting out the seams, of the replacement faces and visual effects. Similarly with the sound, you wanted it to have that natural room tone, or the dirtiness that we have in life.
We did a guerrilla-style Foley track where the Foley was recorded non-traditionally out in the field, in real spaces, in hallways, in rooms that mimicked the rooms that we see on screen. And that created a realness and a little bit of a raw feel to everything that we're experiencing.
We wanted that connectivity with the environments throughout the movie.
At least our idea was that if you are recording real sounds in the real world and applying them to this, that it would have the same sort of soulfulness that we were looking for.
Robert Hernandez, please pick up the white courtesy phone. Please, Robert Hernandez to the white courtesy phone. Welcome to Cincinnati.
Yeah, the walk at the airport's fun because Michael is experiencing everyone as the same. And we punch up all of the sort of annoying sounds of being at that airport, and the backup beeps, and the carts that go by, and hearing all the people complain about they can't make their flights and all that, but it's all Tom, right?
Okay, where are you gonna go? I'm just going. Fuck you. Fuck you. Fuck you. Fuck you. Fuck you.
You've got the Tom voices everywhere. There's that kind of unease, and then we've got a lot of stuff going on in the taxi cab.
Hello. Hi. The zoo is great. World class, they say. Many important, endangered species.
Obviously, Michael is trying to be comfortable, but he just cannot be. And we supported that by designing that cab ride to be an unsettling experience by giving you all the extra rattles and squeaks and moans.
Nah, that's British Airways. Anyway, I have an ear for accents.
We've got a radio on to a kind of a right-wing talk show host. And then we've got the cab calls. Chaos in the cab, I think.
Yeah, there's a toy store about 2 blocks up. It's open all night. Real class place.
I have a pickup call at 16th and Lincoln.
It's the bathroom. Air conditioning and heat controls here. TV remote control, mini bar.
And in the hotel, we have a lot of sort of intense room tone sort of stuff, and air conditioners, and I don't know, they're stressful, I guess.
Every location has that effect.
Anyway, I can't wait to see you when I get back.
With the amount of work that went into making all of these sets and the features on the dolls and the wardrobes, and it's just so amazing to me, and it's the first thing that struck me when I saw it. It's my jaw at the floor, and that we tailored something on the sound dimension to a company that I am very happy with.
I like that word. Anomaly. I like the way it sounds, and I like what it means.